Welcome back to History Day for Leadership Center County. This is the fifth of our video segments that provide you with an overview of Center County history. Our topic in this segment will be the development of Penn State, primarily in the 19th century, but with some touches added to bring us into the 20th and on into the 21st century. Penn State was chartered by the state legislature in 1855 as the Farmers High School of Pennsylvania. It was the Pennsylvania State Agricultural Society that pushed to create a school to provide a scientific education for farmers. This colorful document is a membership certificate from that society. The charter didn't specify a location for the school, so the Board of Trustees solicited proposals from the counties of Pennsylvania. 7 responded with offers of land and/or cash, and after visiting all the proposed sites, the board chose Center County's offer. The land here was offered by Center Furnace ironmaster James Irvin, who had also been a Whig congressman and an unsuccessful candidate for governor. Irvin's 400 acres are the core of today's campus, roughly bounded by College, Atherton, Park, and Shortledge roads. It helped that the offer also had the financial backing of a number of prominent Bellefonte citizens, such as Hugh Nelson McAllister, shown here on the right, and also future Governor Andrew Gregg Curtin. The land was fertile with an excellent limestone-based soil, but the location had another positive attribute from the standpoint of the board. This view is from the rear of the unfinished original Old Main. You're looking right into downtown State College, and as you can see, there's no town there. The only structures across the turnpike that is now College Avenue were a small inn and a couple of houses. This suited the trustees perfectly because they were looking for a location where the boys, we were not yet co-ed, could be isolated from the evils of the city, and we were 40 miles from Altoona. This isolated location was not universally supported, however. Some Philadelphia newspapers said, "What good could be said of an institution whose mailing address is near Bullsburg, Pennsylvania?" In 1856, the trustees began construction of the college building, but a financial panic and economic depression began in 1857. The donors who had pledged funds to help construct the building could not meet their pledges, and construction stopped. By the following year, the trustees realized that they had to start the school or its backers would lose their enthusiasm for it. So a faculty was hired, a curriculum developed, and students were admitted to begin classes in February of 1859. Those first students numbered fewer than 100 men. They were younger than today's students, averaging around 19 years old at graduation. You need to remember that public schooling stopped at 8th grade. Those few students who wanted to move on to higher education would attend 2 or 3 years at a private academy, and there were several in Center County, before seeking admission to college. This picture is one of my favorites from the archives. These 6 students are on a 12-mile hike to Bear Meadows. Seeing the shotgun one fellow is toting, we might think they were out looking, well, maybe for women, but the student on the left has a tin collecting box under his arm for securing botanical or geological specimens, and the shotgun was more likely to take an animal, which would be skinned and stuffed for the college museum. There weren't many opportunities for fun back then, and this served both an educational and a recreational function. The school really became fully functional with the arrival of Dr. Evan Pugh as first president in the fall of 1859. Pugh had sold his family farm in Chester County to go to Europe for a scientific education. He took classes in a number of different universities, as was the norm then, and received his doctorate in what today would be biochemistry from Göttingen University. Pugh also had a goal to lead an agricultural college in America, and he visited and studied agricultural schools all over Europe. In 1858, Board President Frederick Watts offered him the position of president of the Agricultural College, and he immediately accepted. Pew was then doing research at the world's first agricultural experiment station in England. His decisive results earned him honors in both Europe and America. We were starting with a truly world-class scientist in charge. The signal accomplishment of Evan Pugh's term as president was securing the land grant designation for Penn State, or as it was renamed in 1862, the Agricultural College of Pennsylvania. The federal legislation, known as the Morrill Land Grant Act, after its sponsor, Senator Justin Morrill of Vermont, provided for a College of Agriculture and the Mechanic Arts, an A&M school, in each state. It would have an endowment derived from the sale of public land out west, so many acres for each member of Congress. Pennsylvania was allocated more than 500,000 acres to sell. There were 3 steps. First, each state legislature had to accept the Morrill Act. Second, they had to designate a school as the recipient of the endowment. And third, set up a mechanism to sell the land. Now, the Agricultural College was not the only school that wanted this unprecedented federal funding. University of Pennsylvania, Allegheny College, and even Gettysburg College, among others, sought for the designation. Pugh and the college's allies finally succeeded in 1864, with Penn State being designated as the sole land-grant college of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, the battle took its toll. Evan Pugh died from typhoid fever brought on by exhaustion. He was only 36 years old, and he had the vision for what he called a great industrial university. Unfortunately, no one else saw it as clearly as Pugh, or could make it work. Here are his 5 successors from the 17 years after his death. We often refer to this time as the dark ages of Penn State history. Allen and Fraser couldn't get the legislature to set up an office to sell the land. That was done by the Burroughs administration, but he was not a college graduate, and he had little feel for how such an innovative school could work. Calder, who came here in 1871, was a Methodist minister and former missionary to China, and he was gradually turning the college into a classical liberal arts institution. A legislative investigation ended his term. The enemies of the school wanted to strip the land-grant endowment from Penn State, but we survived what would have likely meant the closing of the school. Calder's successor, Shortledge, was equally unfit for the job and lasted only 9 months as president. Calder's 2 lasting accomplishments were to bring the college into the realm of co-ed institutions. He was hired because he was president of Hillsdale College in Michigan, the nation's 2nd co-ed college. He even brought some of the women students with him, where they became our first female graduates. By the late 1890s, women were probably 30% of the enrollment and took the same courses as the male students, some earning degrees in engineering. The second innovation came in 1874, when the school was renamed the Pennsylvania State College. This 1878 lithograph shows the college building with a few residences and barns. It wasn't called Old Main yet. It wasn't old, for one thing, and it wasn't the main building. It was the only academic building. George Atherton was the solution to Penn State's problem. He served as president for 24 years, still the longest term of any Penn State president. Atherton is rightly called the second founder because he brought Penn State back from the dead. He was a Yale graduate and a Civil War officer, but also a faculty member at both the University of Illinois and Rutgers, 2 of the early land-grant colleges. He probably had the best understanding of land-grant colleges in America, and he became their foremost advocate. He was also a lawyer, and he knew how to get along with legislators. He was not only Penn State's most effective lobbyist, but also helped write and pass the Federal Hatch Act, creating the National System of Agricultural Experiment Stations, and the Second Morrill Act, which provided more federal funding for agricultural research. Engineering became the key to establishing a strong foundation for Penn State's future under President Atherton. Pennsylvania was the nation's most industrialized state, and the demand for college-trained engineers was booming. By the turn of the century, more than three-quarters of all Penn State students were engineering majors, and we were one of the top 10 engineering schools in the country. It was this rise of engineering education, research, and extension that altered the public's image of Penn State. We were no longer just that cow college up in the mountains. The Atherton period was also the time when student life made a dramatic change. Before this time, college presidents and faculties kept a tight leash on students, with literary societies being the only approved student activity. Now fraternities were allowed, student arts organizations, bands and theater, student publications, a newspaper and yearbook to start, and athletics, of which football became the quintessential college sport. Athletics also coincided with another change. The loyalty to your class transitioned to loyalty to your school. Class yells, colors, songs, and publications transitioned at Penn State into blue and white colors, the alma mater, Penn State cheers, and a mascot, the Nittany Lion. By 1906, President Atherton was exhausted, and he died while on a trip to Arizona for his health. But his legacy was great. Enrollments had risen from about 60 students when he arrived to over 800, and soon would surpass 1,000. The number of faculty had grown from about 5 to more than 60. From one building, the campus had expanded to a dozen more, this time built with state funding. From 3 curricula, we had expanded to 37 majors, now organized into 7 schools. Regular, continuing state appropriations had begun for the first time in 1887, and research and extension work had begun on the Penn State campus, mostly in agriculture. With all these achievements, Penn State was on the road to becoming the modern university that it is today. When we look at the 20th century and on into the 21st, we would have to say growth would be the watchword. There were bumps with wars and depression and demographic changes, but let's look at enrollment figures as just an indicator of where we've come from and are going to. This first chart shows a gradual increasing trend, with some temporary flattening around World War I and then again in the early 1930s. Then a significant dip with World War II and a boom following, then a little leveling during the Korean War years, followed by a continuing increase. This chart also shows the origins of the Commonwealth campuses in the Depression, their closure during the war, and then their reopening as we had to deal with the GI Bill students. Note that the line for the other locations shows only the additional enrollment. So the total in 1960 would be 16,211 at University Park and an additional 4,605 at other locations for a total of 20,816 for the university. This second chart shows enrollment gains from 1960 to 2012. Once again, there are cumulative numbers, but somehow the horizontal scales are incorrect, and I apologize for that. But the trends represent the reality. And so the yellow line on the top shows total enrollment going from 20,000 plus in 1960 to over 96,000 in 2012. University of Park enrollment almost tripled, growing 180% in those 52 years. Other campus enrollments grew almost 8 times larger by 2012, a 752% increase. World campus enrollments didn't start to appear in this chart until 2006, and they increased 155% in just 6 years. There are lulls almost every 10 years or so. Some of those are reflective of economic cycles. Campus enrollments are more sensitive to those fluctuations, while University Park, the most in-demand campus, keeps its enrollment rise gradual and steady. To conclude, here are four broad categories that point out major changes to complement the growth of Penn State's enrollment and increased its national reputation. Wars obviously caused academic disruptions and enrollments, but also energized federally funded research, best symbolized by the creation of the Garfield-Thomas Water Tunnel, the centerpiece of the Ordnance Research Laboratory. In economics, the Great Depression and economic downturns also caused major disruptions. Enrollments declined and state funding cuts usually happen. In the Great Depression of the 1930s, the college responded by creating undergraduate credit centers, campuses around the state where students could live at home and take freshman classes at a reduced tuition rate. These became today's Commonwealth campuses. While the 30s also included special federal programs to help students and build buildings, economic recessions since then have usually been dealt with by freezing university spending and holding positions open. But funding crises have also pushed tuition ever higher. No one knows at this point how we will deal with the economic challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. The social revolutions that began in the late 1960s have also changed the university in fundamental ways. While anti-war protests impacted the campus and garnered more attention, the civil rights demands of both African Americans and women became more vocal. A primary demand was increasing the numbers of African American and women students. The latter was easier to change with the relaxation of housing rules, making them the same for women as men. Within a decade, women's student numbers had almost reached parity with men. Increasing African American student, faculty, and staff numbers has been more difficult, but the university has made significant progress, as well as breaking glass ceilings to achieve higher leadership roles for both minorities and women. Now, and the second point, this had always been the Pennsylvania State College, with the emphasis on Pennsylvania in outlook and effort. Milton Eisenhower, pictured to the right with his brother Dwight, became president in 1950, and he set the bar higher, seeking to achieve a national role, if not an international one, for Penn State. And of course, having the President of the United States for a brother and regular visitor to the campus didn't hurt either. And the third point, athletics has always been strong at Penn State, with Olympians and championships in track, cross-country, soccer, boxing, and wrestling before World War II. Title IX in the early 1970s added women's programs to the mix, and Penn State achieved early success there too. But it was the achievements of Joe Paterno and football that made the difference. Penn State had been good in football, but never a national power. Now, with national championships in the 1980s, regular winning seasons, and bowl game appearances, television helped Penn State become a national power. This status of Beast of the East made it possible for Penn State to join the Big Ten Conference and achieve even more success and national recognition. Finally, there was the massive boost to research and extension. It had begun with ag in the 19th century, expanded to include engineering, earth and mineral sciences, and home economics. By the 60s and 70s, the growth of humanities and social sciences, as well as the creation of the College of Medicine, had expanded both research and service to the public. Finally, in the 1980s, we saw President Bryce Jordan's explicit goal to make us a top 10 public research university achieved. Along with that, we saw the expansion of computing, from experimental in the 1950s and developing in the 60s to become the PC, Internet, and World Wide Web explosion of the 80s and 90s. With these capabilities, distance education became increasingly digital, and the world campus was born. These four categories of change have dramatically impacted Penn State and made it a national research university rather than just a Pennsylvania one.